maybe not. Bye-bye. Yeah, so it was, the little places.
So talk about what was in the woods, and I like the use of the word suburbs.
Yeah, there was it was a scene that I was not even aware of when I was there, because, like I said, except to go to the bathroom, I never left my spot. But there was all of this stuff, this cultural and community stuff going on in the surrounding woods, and there were a pond or lake where you could go skinny dipping, and a lot of people did. And there was just hippie stuff going on everywhere, and all the people crowded in were like the city, and all the people in the woods were like the suburbs.
Did you fit in there?
Yeah, I did. In my head, it was a new experience, but it was something that I was really comfortable with, And as far as I was concerned, we were all there for the same reason, for the music. And it was just I hate to use the expression, it was the love crowd. That's what they used on the news. It was the love crowd, but it really was. Everybody was cool. Interesting. The time lapse between Woodstock and Altamont, which was like the death of the festival scene, was only 4 months. From great explosion to Hell's Angels and murder and bad stuff. But that was the death of the festival scene, Altamont. 4 months later.
Just want to stick with Woodstock a bit more because, the end of the 60s, there's a lot been going on. There've been the deaths of Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, civil rights was in full throw. There was Vietnam, of course, where a lot of young black men were being sent to Vietnam.
My brother.
And we're going to talk about Vietnam, but I guess my question is, Woodstock, from looking at the pictures and looking at a lot of footage I've seen, looks like a pretty white middle-class festival, and I just feel, how did you feel as an African-American?
Oh, I had been assimilated from when I was a child. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood in New York which was not really segregated. I mean, we all went to the same school. There was a black neighborhood here, a Protestant neighborhood here, a Jewish neighborhood here, but we all went to the same school, and we were all friends, and I knew a lot about Jews and Jewish culture because of the friends I had, and that's actually how I got introduced to folk music too, because I was a jazz and rock and roll guy up until I got that other exposure. But I was also, at the time, this is pre Black Power movement, which came later in the 60s. At the time, assimilation was the rule. That's what everybody figured was happening. And I was with that, my parents were immigrants, my mother from Panama, my father from Jamaica. So I didn't have the Southern or Black urban accent. And that actually got me a long way in the early 60s, and now it's nothing. I was into music, I was into theater. Culturally, those were things where it was mostly white people. So that kind of came naturally to me. I fit in that sense. They might notice that I'm black, but I didn't notice that they were white and I wasn't. That just wasn't part of my makeup at the time. I ran into a stumbling block right about the time of Woodstock because I was an actor trying to do films, and all they wanted in films were angry urban black guys with big afros and attitude, and I was a Shakespearean actor. kind of ran into a little blockade there. That's actually when I started playing music.
So what you're saying to me is that a lot of the people there were kind of on the same trajectory as you in terms of wanting change, or I mean, did you feel strongly about?
No. I had at that time. I had my social. What I cared about, what I thought about was right socially, but I had no agenda. I mean, I was just trying to get along as a black guy in a white society. I had no agenda for politics or for social progress. It was actually happening around me, and I was riding on it. But no, I was not political at the time I went to Woodstock. I was in the early 60s, and I became in the late 80s and into the 90s. But that whole period in between, no political attachments.
But surely you, how old were you at Woodstock?
23.
So were you not living in fear of going to Vietnam?
No, I got a deferment just before I was due.
Could you say I got a deferment?
I got a military deferment just before I was due to be drafted to Vietnam. I got a hernia from trying to lift a piano by myself. I went to a doctor, and they declassified me, and that's why I didn't have to go to Vietnam. That was my luck in the 60s, because I'd have been there, bam. They were ready to send me. I went to the doctor. He gave me the paper. I went back. They gave me a deferment, and I was out of there. Did I get drunk that night?
Did you have friends and family who went?
My brother was drafted, and he served in 101st Airborne, which is a famous unit called the Flying Eagles, Screaming Eagles, I'm sorry, and they're parachuting troops. And he saw action. He wrote me a couple letters about being under fire, and he came back a changed person. He and I were never on the same political plane. I've got a photo of him with his arms around George Bush's shoulder much later in life. When he finished his tour of duty, he stayed in the military. He stayed in the Army Reserve. He worked in the U.S. mission to the UN and to the Veterans Administration, and then they ended up sending him to Iraq. So finally he retired. And unfortunately, a little more than a year ago, he passed away of prostate cancer. But he had a full military honors service, and I went, of course, and it was very impressive. And I'm very proud of him and the service that he did for the country and for his family. He was the one that represented us in the country's, whatever you want to call it, military support.
And just back in the 60s, around the time of pre-Woodstock, obviously Martin Luther King had been killed. And Bobby Kennedy. Did this seem like hope had gone? I mean,
it kind of did. It kind of did. But at the same time...
Sorry, if you can use the word hope, because I've got to take my question out.
Okay. Back in the 60s, when all of the terrible things started to happen, like the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the assassination of Martin Luther King. I was doing a repertory year in Pittsburgh when that happened, and I could not leave the house. There were cops on the street patrolling with dogs. There had been some kind of riot downtown, and I just couldn't leave the apartment. I just kept on looking out the window. But it was a horrible event, causing riots all over. And then losing Bobby Kennedy, because he was the future. Johnson was going, Bobby Kennedy was going to be in, and then he was gone. And we ended up with Nixon. So it did seem, but at the same time, the counterculture was growing as a result of that. And George McGovern, Eugene McCarthy, those were the